What do you make of what you heard?
Listen, I think that everyone agrees that constructive conversation and dialogue is a good thing when it comes to how Canada is responding to the United States. It doesn't sound to me like we are necessarily getting to what we want, which you heard there from Minister LeBlanc, is for the tariffs to come off and for Canada to be able to remove the counter tariffs. There was a conversation about how vital steel and aluminum is to the United States. They're trying to obviously make that point to Howard Lutnick. And I think there was also a conversation about how everyone has to stay united. You know, Doug Ford had put those tariffs or was threatening to put those tariffs of electricity and energy onto states in the United States. And that wasn't really well received by lots of other provinces who thought that Doug Ford was sort of going it alone. But it did get them this meeting, right? It did get them a point of negotiation and in the door to talk to Lutnick. And I know that officials are going to talk again next week on that front.
Richard?
Yeah, I mean, it looked like the Canadian delegation was really putting a positive spin on this meeting with an administration that's being increasingly hostile towards them. And we heard from the finance minister and industry minister really trying to push this message across, showing that there's this integration between the two economies. But this is sort of a different communication track because the White House views Canada as a nation that takes advantage of the U.S. So we'll see how effective this strategy is. But from what we see from this, the meeting lasted about an hour and a half. We saw Premier Ford, Canada's ambassador, and federal finance minister and innovation minister meeting with Howard Lutnick. But at the end of the day, it doesn't sound like there were any deliverables or any breakthrough on tariffs. The delegation tried to have this message that they've turned the temperature down and are feeling optimistic. Take a listen to what Minister Champagne said just moments ago. Okay, so we don't have that clip, but he essentially talked about how optimistic they are and they feel that they have just a bit more information on how to deal with this administration when they return home to Canada. The other thing that I was hoping to get an answer was whether Ontario Premier Doug Ford would resume his surcharge on electricity flowing into those three border states. He was asked when he left the commerce meeting, but he also said that ultimately their goal was to lower those tensions. And he does believe that there are some good vibes all around. Take a listen to Doug Ford.
We're having very productive conversations, and they turned out very, very well. And I just look forward to, again, continue communicating. Next week, we got a lot on the table back and forth, but it was very, very good, very civil, very going back and forth. So I just appreciate the opportunity, and I'm grateful that we're able to do this.
So he's grateful, and this is a much different tone from we've heard from the Premier, from his defiant posturing leading up to this meeting. Now, Ian, you'll recall Ford threatened to turn off Ontario's electricity into the U.S. to further retaliate against Trump's tariffs. And of course, that prompted a threat directly from Trump to double Canadian steel and aluminum tariffs. Both sides eventually backed down, but these actions clearly did not go over well with the administration. In fact, ahead of today's meeting, we heard from Secretary Lutnick essentially give a smackdown of his own to Canada and Doug Ford. Watch this.
Yeah, you have to remember, Canada exists leaning on our economy. I mean, let's face it. Why are we doing all this business in Canada if they're not respectful, if they're not thankful, and they don't want to do it? Imagine a provincial leader, so like the equivalent of a governor, deciding that they're going to attack America and put a 25% increase on energy prices to teach Donald Trump a lesson. I guess what happened? He learned a lesson.
Boy, hence one of the questions from the reporters to the Canadian officials was Howard Lutnick the same way in the meeting that he is on U.S. cable television, or was he a little bit more conciliatory? You know, Rosie, you watch a lot of these a lot more closely than I do. As I was watching, I was struck by kind of the multi-level chess that the cabinet ministers and the ambassador had to play here, that on the one hand, they want to sound tough, especially on the eve of what we expect will be an election campaign. They also are mindful of how those tough tough words may be interpreted by the White House. They seem to have a pretty good rapport with the reporters there, Dominic LeBlanc in particular, kind of joking and laughing. But the questions were tough. I mean, at the end there, he went from a smile to a kind of stern look when he was asked whether the egg marketing board, that whole system, might be on the table. But again, you're more experienced in looking at these kinds of political reactions than I am. So what was your impression as you saw all of that?
No, I think you're right. I think that they are trying as best they can to project a couple of things. First of all, toughness, unity, but also an ability to have a negotiation and a dialogue. Now, let's remember, though, Ian, that this is all happening on the eve of another prime minister coming into place in Canada. And those very ministers that you saw there may or may not be in those jobs tomorrow. They know what jobs they have already. They've been told. The two of them will most certainly be in cabinet, but their jobs may shift in some way. And so they're juggling a lot of different things here, postures that are going to be needed for the country, and also trying to understand how Mark Carney as Prime Minister will change the dynamic here. We've heard some of the language that he's used in recent days, saying that he doesn't want to talk to Donald Trump or have a meeting with Donald Trump until there is respect on the table. What does respect look like for Mark Carney? Well, Dominic LeBlanc told my colleague David Cochrane yesterday that it means to stop saying that we're going to become the 51st state and talk about annexation. Well, as Richard Wells knows, the president was on about that again today. So, they're trying to find lines into Trump's White House and the administration with people who are reasonable and are able to have a conversation about what this is really about. But even if they get clarity on that, there are some lines in the sand for Canada. And you're quite right. Supply management, so the cost of dairy, eggs, and poultry in this country is not on the table. They tried to negotiate that in the last round of NAFTA, and it wasn't there either. It was the last sticking point in those negotiations. So there's a lot of moving parts here, even more so than there would be normally, in large part because of what's going to happen tomorrow.
Richard, I'm going to come back to you in just a sec, but one last question to you, Rosie. Yeah. A smaller cabinet is going to be accompanying the new Prime Minister when Mark Carney is sworn in tomorrow. Some people describe it as a war cabinet. Is that do you think the government here is feeling like it has to direct all of its efforts at this tariff war, or are there other things that are going to be government priorities over the next few weeks besides fighting an election?
Yeah, there will be obviously departments that will still exist, health and things that you need, justice that you require to govern. But what you'll see tomorrow, Ian, is a consolidation of many departments put under much fewer ministers, maybe 20, maybe a couple more than that. And so we are seeing already today that some ministers are losing their jobs. Jean-Yves Duclos will not be in cabinet. He's a Quebec minister of procurement. He will not be in cabinet tomorrow. Diane Lepoutillier, another Quebec minister, says she will not be there, but she is going to run again. And we're hearing of some changes. Stephen Guilbeault, the Minister of Environment, will be in cabinet tomorrow, but he will not have that portfolio. He'll have something else. However, Mélanie Joly, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, she will stay in that job, and you can see why. It is going to be really critically important to have some of these people in these top roles stay in those roles, or within that realm at least, so that they can continue to deal with Donald Trump. Because, you're right. This is, yes, about creating Mark Carney's first cabinet as Prime Minister, but it is also the cabinet that is going to bring him into an election campaign. So he needs to send a strong signal to Donald Trump in terms of this country's approach, and also to Canadians. Because if the main issue, the ballot box question, is going to be who is best positioned to take on Donald Trump, Mark Carney has to start answering that very question tomorrow.
And Richard, last reflection from you after listening to the news conference?
Yeah, well, the Prime Minister designate has a lot of work to do with this government, because we heard President Trump today taking even more shots at Canada. He even questioned its very existence. And Trump went on this rant as he was seated beside NATO's Secretary General in the Oval Office. And what was surprising there, not only what the president was saying about Canada, is that Mark Rutte, who heads up NATO, listened silently as Trump called to erase the Canada-US border and annex a sovereign country that's also a NATO member. I want you to listen to this.
You have to run your own country. And to be honest with you, Canada only works as a state. We don't need anything they have. As a state, it would be one of the great states anyway. This would be the most incredible country visually. If you look at a map, they drew an artificial line right through it between Canada and the U.S., just a straight artificial line. Somebody did it a long time ago, many, many decades ago, and makes no sense.
So we have Trump here really upping those stakes and pushing for Canada to become the 51st state. And all this comes as Trump's new incoming ambassador to Canada delicately pushed back against it at his confirmation hearing, saying he believes Canada is a sovereign state. And Ian, the fact that in itself is a newsworthy statement reflects the uncertain era we're living in.
Yeah, uncertain to say the least. Richard Madden, Rosemary Barton, thanks to both of you.
You bet.